he turned on my mic, and then I'll start.
Yeah, that's okay.
Hi, everybody. So, so today I'm going to talk to you about implementing a Kinfirst culture, but also assessing disproportionality rates. Okay, a little bit about myself. I am an adoption program supervisor at Virginia Department of Social Services. I hold a master's degree in human services with a concentration in family and community services. And I've worked in child welfare for about 17 years in various capacities, starting as a case manager, frontline, so I've seen it, a lot of it. Okay. Today I'm going to give you a brief background on Kinfirst now, the Kinfirst culture in Virginia. Then I'm going to give you some data and fictive on relative placement and fictive kin. Why this topic is important to me. Go over my PICO, go over the methodology into which I completed my actual research project. And of course, you're going to see the references and all that good stuff. Okay. So these are the components to building a Kinfirst culture in Virginia, which at its core is Virginia's practice philosophy, right? And so the practice philosophy is a combination of Virginia's practice profiles and its practice model. And those are daily guides on interactions among staff, with children, families, community partners, and it also helps for families and others to understand the agency's purpose, right? And so Virginia's initiatives are reflective of Virginia practice models. And what that looks like is the Family First Prevention Services Act, of course, fatherhood engagement by being intentional with including or engaging fathers and paternal relatives at the first point of contact and throughout the life of the case, as well as motivational interview training with local staff of the Department of Social Services with an emphasis on the language of change. We have informing local staff of the parental child placement safety program, and then any legislative changes or updates that come through the pipeline, and also stressing the importance of using Virginia's assessment tools, such as like the PAT, which is a permanency assessment tool. And then last but not least, we have Kinfirst Now, which is a collaborative initiative with Virginia and with the local departments of social services, and the component in which I was able to initiate my action research project. Okay. So, Kinfirst culture is a catalyst for these 11 core skill sets known as the practice profiles. Engaging in these practices will lead to a stronger Kinfirst culture. And my action research project will emphasize the importance of demonstrating cultural and diversity competence. This means that child welfare professionals should be addressing disproportionality and racial disparities when it is appropriate to do so. And this will help to build trust and through transparency and understanding throughout all cultures, right? And so, what do I mean by a Kinfirst culture? In Virginia's Kinfirst culture, we recognize that families are the experts. They should always be included in the decision-making processes, right? And that they should rely on one another for their support. And we need to include these values literally in everything that we do. Families are the experts to what they need. And so I will discuss a little bit more about Kinfirst culture, but first some national and state data on relative placement, or kinship placement, sorry. So when it comes, go back. Where's the slide? National, that looks different, I'm sorry. So when it comes to overall rates of placement in foster care for kin for national data, it sits around 34%. Right? For Virginia, these are the overall averages over the last couple of years. And kinship placements have been increasing every month in the state fiscal year of 2024. And around May, I believe probably up to now, we're sitting at 17.2%. So we are getting there, and we're doing a lot of work to get there. So let's talk about the benefits of kinship placements. There are several positive outcomes, such as reduction of trauma, fewer placement changes, and maintaining cultural connections, which we know is extremely important. And this is a big deal. However, as recent as June 2024, the Children's Bureau reported that over 50 years of data demonstrates that Black and American Indian or American Native and other children of color are disproportionately represented and have disparate outcomes throughout the child welfare process, including in investigations, entry into out-of-home care, and exits from care. And so what that looks like is they experience lower reunification rates, they are less likely to be reunified within the 12 months, they are less likely to be adopted within 24 months, and they are less likely to be placed with a relative within that 18-month time frame. So when I talk about being culturally and diversity competent, this is the type of information that you need to know. When you're going to have conversations with communities of color, talking about child welfare, you're gonna have to understand where their fears, their concerns come from. And when we're talking about having conversations about kinship placements and the requirements of it, or relying on your support systems within a community, before you can, or family preservation, so that you don't have to deal with your children. Before you can start having those conversations, you may have to have a pre-conversation to address fears, to talk about whatever mistrust that they may have, or talk about, just having a conversation, because they may not have the right information. They may have heard something from someone in the community, or just a fear altogether, because they haven't had the experience. Families of color have a different type of experience and a history when it comes to child welfare. So before they can even hear anything that would be beneficial to them and their family coming from child welfare, you're going to have to break down the barrier with trust, and it's not saying that it's going to be an easy conversation. It's not going to be a quick conversation, but I guarantee you, you're going to do the work one way or another. Whether you're going to do it in the beginning or you're going to do it in the end, but you're going to do the work. So do it right the first time and in the beginning. Okay. So Virginia has acknowledged this, which is why the Kinfirst now is such a significant part of the Kinfirst culture. Kinfirst Now is a collaborative initiative, as I said before, with Virginia Departments of Virginia Local Departments of Social Services that are intended to disrupt the processes that have led to children into non-relative placements or even being displaced, right? And so the focus of Kinfirst Now is to prioritize and increase family engagement across the child welfare continuum. And this is doing this through a teaming approach. And this ensures ongoing family engagement throughout the whole decision-making process, right? Especially when children cannot safely remain in the home. You need to have a conversation with everybody. And this includes enhancing and or creating internal processes that reinvest staff time on search, discovery, and assessments of relatives or fictive kin through a teaming approach. urgent discovery and engagement of family at first points of contact, and engaging of family and natural supports in pregnancy planning. Which brings me to my PICO. If staff in local localities, did I change it, sorry? If staff in the selected localities that are slated for the Kinfirst Now initiative receives a needs assessment, training, and coaching on how to implement the Kinfirst Now initiative, will it lead to improved staff knowledge and practices on how to place children with kin? And so I had a lot of steps completed this actual research project. I would say the steps to answer this question for me included meeting with an internal review board, which is a board that decides if my research met the federal definition of human subject research. I requested data from 15 local agencies, which included their local Department of Social Service overall population data, disproportionality rates within the local foster care population, and then the first placements for new entries into foster care by race and ethnicity. I completed a review of agencies' documents and conducted literature reviews. And then I chose 4 localities out of the 15 in which that would fall in the time frame of me being able to complete the action research project. And then that could also complete a Rate Your Kinfirst assessment, which is a needs assessment. And on that needs assessment, I had 3 extra questions added about racial disparities and disproportionality, which I had to get approval for too. So, after reviewing the data and completing the reviews, I completed site visits to 3 out of the 4, which means I physically traveled to these locations, spoke with staff, leadership, community partners, and reviewed their disproportionality data with them. And during these site visits, I reviewed it with everybody that was present or that came, which was a lot. And it resulted in 2 agencies that added steps to their strategic plan, because they had an overall plan for their localities, that included completing a disproportionality diagnostic tool with their agency's leadership, and then, which I'll explain later on. So, for my literature review, early on in my research, I reviewed an article and resources that address the history and traditions of raising children informally with relatives and fictive kin, while expressing the importance of kinship placements and highlighting the barriers. It reports that Black families have a tradition of rearing children through extended families and informal relationships, and that sometimes the child welfare policies have separated children from their families, and that has caused a diminish in tradition and resulted in persistent racial disparities. However, in some areas, the overuse of formal kinship care as a replacement for family reunification or informal care presents a variety of challenges as well, and may create further disparities. So as you see, there has to be a balance. According to Deadlock and Boyd, they contend that there are factors external to the child welfare system, such as poverty and related risks, and neighborhood conditions, and those that are even those that are internal to child welfare systems, such as racial biases, institutional racist policies, and placement dynamics that result from a common underlying factor, unfortunately. And this is structural and institutional racism, both within child welfare system and in the community at large, or society at large. The literature supports the implication that kinship policies and practices work in helping to reduce racial disparities when it is done right. And that's why I stress, have those conversations. They help have the conversations and then move down the line. So when it's done right, but more is still needed to be done, such as examining any historically racist practices that may still exist in our system that has been there for decades, right? And you can make and you can make more progress dismantling racial disparities through provisions of financial and other resources to relatives and kinship placements, including family preservation. Again, I know we're talking about kinship placements, but if you can keep the children in the home with putting services in, that is the best place for a child. And completing special licensing reviews for relatives and kinship families with minor or long past criminal histories. We heard about that earlier, just reviewing things, and increasing material supports for informal kinship. How many times have you heard, like, I can keep them, I just need a little bit more help. And so we don't have to get involved, but we can give them some kind of help. Again, that might be the best practice for their child. But most important, barriers to kinship placements need to be addressed with practitioners, legislators, and administrators that are creating the policies, laws, and practices that we use when it comes to child welfare placement. So, now it's time to review some data that shows what this looks like. So looking at two agencies, this is the overall population for both. And for reference, all others include children who were listed as multi-race, unknown, Asian, or they declined. And then Black and white children comprised of most of the overall local population and the foster care population. So this is the foster care population for those agencies. So this emphasizes kind of the rates of disproportionality. As you can see in the slide before, the overall population, and then this one shows it within the foster care. And so what I found is Black children account for a higher percentage in foster care when compared to the local population for both agencies. And so for agency A, Black children were overrepresented at 1.41%, while white children were underrepresented at 0.54%, even though they were more of the outside population. For agency B, Hispanics was 1.63% being overrepresented, Black were 1.38% being overrepresented, and white was 0.78%, showing an underrepresentation. So this is showing the first placement for Black children. The next slide will show it for the white children. The next two slides show the first placement for new entrants into foster care for those agencies. Majority of the children throughout all races were placed in foster home non-relative, and very few children were placed in congregate care, which is a great thing. For agency A, about 33% of African American children were placed in kinship upon first entry. So they did really well. And this is showing the same data for white children. So when it came to the practices of placing children with relatives, both agencies were assessed by completing a Kinfirst agency assessment. Respondents were presented with the statements about their agency's culture, policy, and practices related to kinship placement. They were grouped into three categories, such as local Department of Social Services wide, prevention and protection, and then permanency. And then, of course, like I said before, 3 questions were added about racial disparities and disproportionality. Those questions were, I have knowledge of the data that shows the extent of disparities for children of color. We have a plan in place for addressing disproportionality in kin placement, and we have a process for ensuring that staff responsible for kinship placements are trained in culturally competent strategies. So, here's my responses. And the knowledge of the data on disparities for children of color varied about 36% between the two localities. And as you can see on the other side, agency aid, they were very much aware and demonstrated being culturally diverse, diversity competent, and they responded to having more knowledge about their data that shows the extent of the disproportionality. Both agencies were asked to complete the disproportionality diagnostic tool that is created by the National Association of Public Child Welfare Administrators. This helped to examine the disproportionality within child welfare agencies' jurisdiction. You can also use this tool to identify any gaps, to identify any gaps in the agency, target areas of improvement, or highlight areas where they're doing great so that you can duplicate it and mitigate against this disproportionate representation. The tool can be taken by an individual or a group of users within the agency. And the goal was to use the tool to help start those conversations and possibly create a plan to help with improvement or expand on the practices that they were already doing great. Okay. So, despite the tool needing to be filled out manually, both agencies completed it in its entirety. It was 18 pages, y'all. So they had to print it out, fill it out, and then scan it back to me, and then it was aggregated. So the fact that they did that alone, I was happy about. And it took some conversations. Majority of the responses on the tool were about 50-50. Both agencies stated no to gathering data that determined the specific ethnic or racial information. For their population and their jurisdiction, and no to having like goals to address specific needs, such as reducing the mental stay for Black children within their community. However, both agencies reported that their staff demonstrates having internalized the values, missions, and goals related to diversity and disproportionality by their actions, their behaviors, and by their decision making. They stated that law enforcement and courts are making public effort to address disproportionality in their system, and to the issues of disproportionality being included in their community education programs. One of the agencies reported having a DEI plan, a DEI team, and the city has a DEI consultant. And they have an action for change plan, and they have race and racism community conversations. And this is the same agency that had the 33% benchmark. So it is worth noting that the agency that had a DEI plan, team, and community conversations placed about 25.5% of their overall foster care population with kin, and within those numbers, 33% of those children were Black children. So, okay. So it shows that barriers to kinship placement can be impacted when you are culturally and diversity competent. And you make an effort to address the concerns surrounding racial disparities with your community, practitioners, or whoever it takes. For me, the challenges were physically traveling to the locations, because I spend 2 days at a time and speak in front of a lot of people like I'm doing today. So that was one of my challenges. And then, of course, like I said, the disproportionality tool actually being a manual document and not available online. And we tried, trust me, we contacted, tried, it just didn't go through. For my next steps, I will be continuing to support those agencies in addressing disproportionality and getting placements. Identify any other agencies where I can maybe deliver the training, use the tool, and support them in addressing disproportionality in placement. What I learned that often racial disparity and disproportionate data is not known. A lot of people have never pulled it, especially when it's in child record or case management. You're working to put out the fires every day, and so you're just trying to make sure children are safe. And I get it, completely get it. So a lot of times it's just not known. Not that it's not important, it's just been pulled. They don't know. Let me see, the agency with more knowledge about the data surrounding disparities was also more aware of the plan for addressing disproportionality in placement. They were more aware of the process and ensuring kinship placement staff were trained in culturally competent strategies. And they were also showing more Black children placed within. So for me, my MPLD impacts, MPLD helped me to realize that data is the catalyst for change. You just gotta get the right people to pay attention.